Welcome to the Ecommerce Wizards Podcast, where we feature top leaders in e-commerce and business to discuss proven strategies and trends from people in the trenches. Now, let's get started with the show.
All right, so Guillaume Lutsman here. I'm the host where I feature top leaders in business and e-commerce. Today, I have Robert Wren with me, who's head of partnership at JetRails Hosting. And today we'll be talking about the transition from Magento 1 to Magento 2. Just before we start, we have a sponsorship here. This episode is brought to you by MageMontreal. If a business wants a powerful e-commerce online store that will increase their sales or move piled up dormant inventory to free up cash, and we surely all want that, or to automate business processes to gain efficiency and reduce human processing error, our company, MageMontreal, can do that. We have been helping e-commerce stores for over a decade. Here's a catch. We're specialized and only work on the Adobe Magento e-commerce platform. We're among only a handful of certified Adobe Magento companies in Canada. We do everything Magento related. If you know someone who needs design, development, maintenance, training, support, debugging, or performance analysis and enhancements on your Magento e-commerce store, we got their back. You can email our team, support@MageMontreal.com, or visit us at MageMontreal, M-A-G-E, Montreal.com. All right, Robert, so back on track. Let's talk about that migration, Magento 1 to Magento 2. Let's start high level. Why do merchants need to do it, or do they need to do it?
Well, I think that's been the question for a few years now. When Magento 2 first hit, it was at this point a very long time ago. We're going back to, makes me feel old, right? 2015. And Magento announced this new platform. And it was an entire shift from the Magento 1 code base. Obviously, there's a lot of similarity. But there was no easy upgrade path. There was no one click or a few hours here or there. And so that started this debate about when do we upgrade? When is it cost effective? When is it going to be important? And then we finally hit, after some delays, after the Magento and Adobe teams moved the end of life of Magento 1 forward a bit. They gave people a reprieve and said, look, instead of 3 years, we'll give you basically until June of 2020 in the end to upgrade, and they stopped putting out security patches. So that June 30th, 2020 shifted into a new era for those Magento 1 users, a different era where the original software publishers aren't providing a security patch for the sites anymore. And I could go on and on about some of the implications of that. But that is going to impact PCI compliance. It's going to impact actual security of the sites. So at this juncture, users have choice still. They can secure their stores on Magento 1 using patches from others and other security tools. And there are layers of protection that you would want. They can move to Magento 2, which is a more modern stack. It does have a lot of improvements and additions. At this point, Magento 1, by and large, is a more static site that you're operating, a platform that you're operating. Magento 2 is receiving frequent updates from the Adobe team, and from the community at large. So in that sense, you're talking about e-commerce as a living, breathing ecosystem, as an industry. And Magento 1, if you have everything that you need, you might be able to stick with for a while longer. In some cases, it's possible for years. But for a lot of users, they're going to want to start to at least plan their migration. And that's the important, I think, factor here. It's all come down to planning, that a lot of businesses waited until now to figure out what they should do, what they want to do. And now that we've had a few months without security patches from the Adobe team, I think we're starting to see the chips on the table and what it actually looks like. Sites haven't been, quote unquote, imploding. They haven't, it's not a Y2K. Right. They haven't stopped working.
Sites did not explode. And that's an anxiety that merchants have. Like right now, if they're still on a Magento 1 store, they generate sales right now. What's the real risk for them? Could they one day not be able to process, be rejected by a payment processor? Like, what's the risk for their business to stay on Magento after the end of life date?
So there was a lot of fear in the weeks leading up to Magento 1's end of life. Visa put out an advisory, as did other companies in the payment processing world, saying end of life software, everyone should be moving on from this. This is not a software that you should be using. They didn't take into account options to continue to support the product. They either hadn't researched that far or weren't going to put their names out there in that way that they wanted to, in essence, just toe a certain line to tell people, hey, look, you've got old software, time to update. In reality, there are paths that merchants can choose. And so one great option that came up leading up to this was MageOne. And MageOne is a company that you pay for a subscription to Magento 1 patches. They have a bug bounty program. They have experts in the field. They have partnerships with companies like JetRails and lots of others. And they are standing up patches. They've already got a range of patches that they've released since Magento 1 hit end of life. I believe we're fast approaching 10 or so of them. So they're active. They're doing what needs to be done. And they're making sure that sites can remain secure and in essence, compliant. Which really I think of separately. Security and compliance are two different things. Compliance says that you met someone's rules that are predetermined, and security really typically goes above and beyond that, because just because you've met someone's baseline rules doesn't mean that you're really doing everything that you should be in a holistic way. The other major authority that has been stepping up to the plate is a company called, or a group, I should say, called OpenMage. Magento is open source software, and OpenMage has created a fork of Magento 1, basically a version of Magento 1, and they are putting out new versions. They are putting out new features and some security updates. You don't pay them. It's available through GitHub, and it gives you a source as well. I think individually, businesses need to take a look between these companies and see which one is going to meet their security needs, which one is going to meet their short-term or long-term needs. I don't think that it's going to be a holistic answer for everyone deciding on exactly the same metrics, but you have options there. So in that sense, you shouldn't be sitting high and dry waiting for a security incident. The second side of this is, though, dealing with more proactive security in general. So security patches are important. That's the case for Magento 2, for WordPress, for Drupal, for any open source platform, right? It's basic. But you also need to do other things to lock down your website so that there are layers between hackers and the important information and the code base and the database and everything else.
Are there practices like that JetRail would bring, let's say, to the table in this regard?
Absolutely. So when it came to Magento 1 end of life, we knew that we had customers that would be potentially in harm's way. And we looked at it really, really, really stringently to try to determine what could we bring to the table that would make sense. And we determined that with authorities like MageOne and OpenMage putting out updates, that we were web hosts and not web developers, and that would be our best use case. We do put out some Magento extensions for integration of systems like Cloudflare and Varnish for caching, to provide certain enhancements, other things. It's not that we were incapable, but when it came to standing up bug bounty programs and dealing with the intricacies of the platform, it takes a good amount of attention.
It's not your mission. It's not your code.
That's right. And we didn't believe that this should be done by 100 different companies to be done well. We thought that there should be a smaller number of groups really focused on it, and we wanted to support those groups. And so we have partnerships and relationships, and we're involved in the community at large as such. But there's that side. But on our side, so instead of focusing on the security patches, which basically a vulnerability is identified, or some other security issue is identified, like there's a version of PHP that's going to no longer be supported, no longer get security patches itself. And so you're going to want to upgrade your Magento website to be compatible with a new version of the PHP software that's going to run in your Magento hosting environment. So there are things that you're going to get out of those patches that are going to be, in essence, reactive to known information. But then there's multiple layers of proactive security that we can have in addition, and that every Magento user, in our opinion, should have. And so by and large, these are things that we deploy for our Magento 2 users as well. There might be some slight differences in certain tools that we use or certain configurations, but we deal with web application firewalling. So basically, locking down the environment, locking down the Magento admin, and other resources that folks from the outside that don't work as part of the team managing the website, it shouldn't be accessible to the whole world. There are things that we do that have to do with reactive security layers ourselves. So we've got intrusion detection systems and malware scanners and different things that are going to tip us off if something is awry. And we've got a NOC, a network operations center, where we're monitoring our accounts 24/7. We're monitoring our client sites. So if we see signs, whether it's a DDoS attack, a denial of service attack of some sort, or some kind of changes to the code base or otherwise that seem unusual, or connections to the site that seem unusual, we want to notice those things and help address them before it turns into a major incident, before there's a lot of data that's, let's say with card skimmers, that someone's injected code into the site that's going to steal credit cards as people are in the checkout. Well, if you catch that real fast, you've really limited any potential damage done. Or if you catch them while they're trying to break in before they really inject code or do other things. So there are layers here that are always supposed to work together, just like in the brick and mortar world, where you can have security guards, you can have alarm systems, you can have good locks, you can you can have other best practices.
Preventive and reactive measures. But so there's a lot of things that JetRails can put in place to help a merchant on Magento want to feel more secure. In the meantime, there's that two project, Magento and MageOne, that you can go with in terms of extending the lifespan of Magento 1. But are there downsides like that game plan? Because you were talking also they should be planning the migration to Magento 2. So like, what's the downside of trying to extend the lifespan like that?
That's a good question. Magento is alive. I mean, Magento 1. There's no question that there's a lot of users that are still using it. Some aren't accepting credit cards or debit cards, payment cards, as we typically refer to them. So some don't have the same compliance issues. Maybe it's used internally within an organization, or maybe it's used as an online catalog. And there's less fear of what's going on. Someone has done a lot of custom work to that site. It's going to cost a lot of money to migrate to another platform, and there are challenges. I think for some users, they don't yet know how pricing has in some cases come down or stabilized for that migration. Because at this point, teams like MageMontreal have worked on so many migration projects that inevitably tools and best practices and enhancements to that process come out that make some of that more streamlined. It's a more fine-tuned process than some of those early projects, in 2015, 2016, et cetera. I think for some, when Magento 1, was really cooking along. And I think that was part of the challenge back toward 2015. Magento 1 had really become stable. It was a good place to be. And Magento 2 released and it was not stable. And so a lot of people initially heard a lot of feedback about Magento 2 being unstable, being buggy, being a tougher platform.
In 2015, that was totally true. When it came out 2.0, was not ready at all. But by the version 2.2, it was considered very stable and matured. And it took them a good 2 years, if not a little more, to get there.
Yeah. And I think that's some of the conversation is that there's history to sort of rewind, and people get hardwired on some of those things, that you get a prejudice against something, or sometimes you feed into your own bias. So, well, I don't want to spend the money on it. And somebody told me once that it was, cumbersome or something else. And so I just stick with that. Taking it a step back, a few weeks ago, there was a major security incident that affected Magento 1 sites. It was labeled card bleed. And there were thousands of Magento 1 sites that were attacked over the course of a long weekend. A company called Sansec that we partner with, and we utilize some of their security tools, great company. They caught it and helped the Magento 1 ecosystem to deal with that. Patches were put out. Now, I'll say that JetRails, our customers were not impacted. Our security held up. I know that that seems overly simplified, because it was what's known as a 0 day. It was something that hadn't been seen before. It hadn't been exploited in the wild. It wasn't an old bug or known issue that someone took advantage of. It's something that hadn't yet been taken advantage of. Although from our standpoint, it was, again, I don't want to overstate and say obvious, but it had to do with a portion of the website that only admins should really have access to in the first place, and that in our configuration wasn't open to the public for hackers to be able to attack. This is, the sort of thing that could have happened with another platform. Like I say, it's a 0 day. It's not something that there was a patch out for one way or the other. And patches were put out by these patching authorities like Mage1 to help lock things down. But for users that had more secure web hosting, they were in better shape in the first place. So taking that sort of a step forward, there are Magento 1 users that are doing perfectly well and that haven't broken ground on a new site yet. And that's okay. On the flip side, there are things coming out for Magento 2 that make it really interesting. So there's a movement now that's underway toward PWA, progressive web apps, which allows for a very fast, a very user-friendly front-end interface for the website. And so, and it can be more like a mobile app experience, and you can even save a tile to your mobile device.
Yeah, actually,
that acts like a mobile app.
PWA is predicted to kill about 50% of the native app market in the next coming years. So, that's just how powerful that change is.
Yeah. So Magento 2, I just put up the article on October 15th. Magento released their latest updates for Magento 2, and in that in that article, I mentioned that PWA Studio, which is a product of Magento, reached version 8. And so they keep moving forward with this solution with its own front end theme, its own framework for the front end that makes it easier to experience that PWA technology, to deliver it to your users. It is not something that every site's going to have by 2021, right? This is still
it's early market still, but it's one example that with Magento 1, you're stuck with old technology, like you're stuck with VHS, and you're not getting the new DVD and Blu-ray and HDTV stuff. You're stuck with the old stuff.
That's right. I mean, think about it like that. Once Magento 2 was out, the Magento team really focused on putting out new features for Magento 2. On the JetRails podcast, we've tackled this. I believe we tackled it in the JetRails blog as well. The progression of Magento 2, that sometimes it's hard to even get a pulse on it until you go back and look at all of the deployments of Magento 2.0, 2.1, 2.2, 2.3, now 2.4, and see what's there that wasn't there back in Magento 1. And there are a number of items. And so I think that that's something that businesses need to always look at. And it's a question of value. So you sit there and you say, what are these things worth to me? You look at some of the other questions around security and compliance and, just other things that are important to you as a business, and you make a decision. And in some cases, let's say that your site is a few years old already and it's time for a new theme. It's time for a refresh anyway.
Right.
Is that
the point of reinvesting? Like, is it a safe investment to put money back in Magento 1 be curious on your point of view. Sort of the web opinion is a heavy no, but what's your point of view on it?
Yeah, I think that some of it comes down to, so firstly, if you're going to do a full redesign, if you're looking to go with a PWA front end experience, or you're otherwise going to be doing some heavy retooling there, you have to say to yourself, well, if I'm going to dump 100 hours at whatever hourly rate of labor into that, that could go toward my Magento 2 project where I'd have to start with a fresh theme anyway. Wouldn't that start to make some sense to rip the Band-Aid off and go for the newer stack? Right. I think the same applies in some cases. Once you start to get down to Magento extensions and integrations, that there really aren't any wealth of integrations or extensions being written for Magento 1 anymore. Certainly on a case-by-case basis,
they're even
businesses meet
removed
demand.
from the marketplace. Like on the marketplace, you cannot download Magento 1 extension. You have to go directly to some vendor's website to get them, and they have no more updates, no more patches, no more.
Yeah, I mean, some are still supporting, some are still patching, and I think it's because, look, I have another article on the JetRails blog that just went up on Friday that talks about Magento 1 as it relates to what's happened, basically what we're talking about today, what's happened since June 30th or since July 1st, perhaps. And I think that really aligns that you're talking about, depending on whose math you use. Forgenix has suggested that there are still about 200,000 Magento 1 sites in the wild. Sansec is saying closer to maybe a little under 100,000. So regardless of whether it's 100,000 or 200,000, obviously it's a huge discrepancy there, but it's a lot of sites. So for some of these extension developers and some of these teams, they still have more users on Magento 1 than Magento 2. It's not unusual. So not everyone has stopped patching or supporting those users. And I think that that's an important distinction. And I think that's what's happened across the board. So, going back to the earlier statement about before Magento 1 hit end of life, some of the payment processors and folks were, throwing up some warnings, including big companies like PayPal saying, putting out messaging to a lot of their users on Magento 1 saying that they weren't going to continue to support Magento 1.
Right. It's pretty threatening message for like merchants. I had merchants talking to me and say like, hey, are PayPal going to cut me? Like, am I at risk of not being able to be transactional anymore on my website like tomorrow? Like, what's my risk?
We had a lot of those similar conversations. I was running into conspiracy theories because at this point, and I don't think that there's, I don't think that these companies sit down I don't think that, I don't know if it's going to come out poorly, but I don't think that they're organized in that way with something like that. But, at this point, Braintree is the only payment processor native in Magento 2.4. Everything else you have to add. Magento had a program with PayPal to give people some kind of upgrade financing to get from M1 to M2. And so there were certain things there that some people pointed to, but I think that it was a case of, as opposed to business-minded people, I really think that this has been a case, and we saw this at other payment processors. This came down to compliance. This came down to security. The security-minded folks took a look at a balance sheet, risk sheet. That's what they do for a living. And they said, we have X number of Magento 1 users. If there is a security incident and they're not PCI compliant, and we allowed them to keep processing without being PCI compliant, we're going to have some liability here, and we're going to take action X as a result. And that's what we saw a variety of payment processors doing. But in the end, even with some of that strong language, it didn't wind up, from everywhere that I've seen, coming to fruition. That I'm yet to find payment processors that really cut ties with their Magento 1 merchants.
I think they're barking for now, but the real question is like, will they bite? So
look, I spent a lot of time reaching out to a lot of my friends in payment processing. We have several partnerships that we made sure were on the ready in case any of that was really happening. And because we don't mind merchants, feeling some pressure to make some decisions, that otherwise things can really stagnate. But we didn't want our users just being left high and dry. And we know that for our customers, we're more of a white glove service as a web host, that we have those conversations. And, especially some of our clients may not be working with an agency. And so we're their eyes and ears into the Magento community in many cases. It's a challenge. So we made sure that we had several reputable major firms ready that were going to be happy to service them if companies like PayPal pulled out of that market. And it's PayPal's right to do so. I don't hold anything against them. I think they could have, if they were going to do that, I think they could have given users more notice. But it's a string of events. I think that until Visa and companies, of similar relation, we're reaching out to these issuing banks and these payment processors and saying, yeah, Magento 1 end of life. We don't want anything to do with that. I think that they were just doing business as usual. So there was a lot of ill will, I'd say, in those weeks. And then very Y2K style, nothing really came of it. Everyone lived to fight another day.
But also the question of understanding that Adobe left a healthy platform as of June 2020. So it's not like you're left with a shipwreck. You're left with a healthy platform. They're just saying we will not continue supporting it, we'll not patch it, and we're moving on to something else. And there's the other aspect is the underlying technology under Magento 1. So yes, you can coast along with it, but as you were mentioning, like the PWA stuff, just to get back to this in a more clear way, like Magento 1 has a certain old stack of technology, PHP and so on. And then you have Magento 2 coming with a new stack of technology that I'm going to call those the classic web development features. And then there's the new generation that's PWA. So PWA is still Magento 2, but I mean, from a technological point of view, you have Magento 1, you have Magento 2, and then you have Magento 2 PWA. It's again a new stack of technology to develop on, to build for the future and so on. So Adobe sure doesn't want to develop on the old stack of Magento 1. It's saying like, I'm going to invest more in VHS development. Like, doesn't make sense.
It's cost prohibitive because if you're maintaining, and that's why version 2.0, 2.1, 2.2, they're all end of life. They're not supporting them either. If they're out there working on updates and patches for every version of software, then they're burning resources and they're not really working on a core platform. So in essence, I think that users have to understand that is the basic policy of Adobe, is that they're going to focus on businesses that are going to be upgrading and more future-minded.
It's just logical. I mean, you can place a call with an iPhone 3 or a 2010 Android phone if you feel like it, but I mean, don't expect the latest feature or anything for that.
Don't expect security updates for Windows XP. I think that we can all
the world moves on.
Yeah, look, I use, I'm an Android phone user, and there's just so long that those phones stay supported as well with the latest operating systems and security. Wow. This is part and parcel of the world that we live in. Now, we've talked PWA. There are other things that Magento has certainly released in Magento 2. There's the two-step native checkout as opposed to the five-step checkout of Magento 1. There's still a lot of users that are going to use one-step checkout or Bolt or something else to further improve the checkout. But nonetheless, they've had some varying improvement in the checkout process itself.
The AI. Yeah, the AI as well, the artificial intelligence. So if you go with Magento, let's say commerce, yes, there's the Adobe Sensei artificial intelligence available since roughly May 2020, regardless how you host it. And if you go open source, you can add, let's say, the Amazon personalized AI, which is the recommendation engine of Amazon. You can have that on your Magento site. The recommendation will not be as thorough as, let's say, with Adobe Sensei, not because of the recommendation engine itself, not because of the the technology there. It's more about the integration within Magento, that you install a plugin which allows you to use, let's say, Amazon personalized on your Magento site. There are plugins for that on the marketplace. But you have so many new tech that are really cool. When you use AI to, let's say, recommend personalized products, personal recommendation, imagine you go on Netflix and everybody would see the same recommendation. It makes no sense. Maybe my wife's recommendation to be different from my recommendation. Maybe it's not the same thing we want to watch on my kid. We don't want to watch the same stuff for sure. So,
absolutely.
You cannot have
search feature. Yeah,
Exactly.
which I think of in a very similar way. You're trying to find product in a store and think about it. I always talk about it like having a sales clerk in a physical store. If the clerk says, no, we don't have that, or yeah, it's on aisle 12 when it's really on aisle 2, or you're not making a sale, it's a bad experience, no one's happy. Magento 1's site search feature was very weak. It was very basic. Magento 2 now, some people are already using a more advanced system like SearchSpring. Fantastic. But for folks that want to stick open source that aren't looking to add an expense there, Magento 2 integrates Elasticsearch natively. And so you get additional improvement and additional benefit off the shelf. And if it's something that you weren't already addressing in a better way in the first place, it's great. Multi-source inventory is another feature that came out in Magento 2, where if you've got multiple stores or multiple warehouses and you need to track the inventory that's available in different locations and create rules and do things based on that, Magento 2 is much better equipped to handle that and for you to build on top of than M1 was.
And same thing.
A lot of that
mentioning about search. When we're talking about search, it's in the roadmap for 2021 to add AI to the search of Magento. So it's part of those all new features you get with the software that's of course still alive and evolving versus sticking to the old software.
Yeah, and some of it, there were security enhancements. So, whether it's including Google reCAPTCHA or now two-factor authentication. I mean, for Magento 1, our team actually wrote a two-factor authentication extension that would help protect the Magento admin, and lots of users still using it. It's on GitHub. It's free. We did it as a service for the community. We don't specifically charge for any of our extensions. The benefit is making it harder for someone to break into your Magento admin. And it's something that Magento recognized enough to develop something in the core for Magento 2. But that, to date, you'd still have to, if you don't have it yet, go get that extension.
Right.
It's free. It's on GitHub. It's great. But
so
there's a lot of that's happening. There's also, new native integrations and things, partnerships that Magento has that they've added new things in that you can leverage from third parties. No shortage of opportunities.
So we've covered like security issues fairly well, and then all the new benefits of switching to the new platform. Not totally, but we've covered a lot, and that it can be an exciting experience actually if you're due to reinvent, redesign your user experience and get all the new features and the latest technology and so on, and you build for the future. Because reinvesting in the Magento 1 is, of course, not just risky; it's lost money, pretty much. Now there are options we're talking about that you can extend the lifespan of your Magento 1. You can go to hosting like JetRails with added security measure. You guys will help them with either Mage 1 or Open Mage with like security patches for
absolutely. They get to choose where they want to get their software from. We can advise them, which we're happy to do, but at the end of the day, we believe that merchants should have choice the same way that, whether they want to use the WAF that we partner with Cloudflare or Sakuri or other companies, they have some choice. We'll make strong recommendations, but we believe in that open source community and in working with the systems that are going to best support those developers and those website owners. Absolutely.
Right. And then say what's compatible between like Magento 1 and Magento 2? Like there's stuff I can import, right?
So by and large, moving over the data needs a little bit of freshening up on the way over. There are tools for that and teams that are very experienced with it, like MageMontreal. But moving over the data and even perhaps some of the settings is not necessarily the hardest part. I would say that the biggest part of the job from my perspective is going to have to do with the front end development, so theming, and it's going to have to do with extensions and any customization of the platform. Most people chose Magento 1 because of its flexibility and malleability, because they could customize it to do what they wanted to do. And so now, sort of like software, when you talk, software that was built for Windows XP versus software that's built for Windows 10, or the same could be said for other operating systems. In some cases, you need to go out and get new extensions or have extensions built for you that are compatible or ported over in a particular way. It's not the same platform. So between those things, the data migration, the theming, the extension, or installation and customization portions, there's a lot of things happening aside from any final touch-up around content and testing and go live. And from the hosting vantage point, we spin up a fresh server. While we have users that have upgraded in place, in essence, they've stood up a Magento 2 site within their existing Magento 1 servers that we operate for them, or within the AWS or other cloud accounts that we operate for them. Most have us spin up a fresh dev environment, and that may become their staging or production environment later. But we start fresh, because just like a house, imagine how much clutter you have after 10 years. If you think about an old computer and how many things you've installed, who's used it, what's going on with it, sometimes it's just better to start with something clean that isn't cluttered up. Start with applying security principles properly from the onset. And so that includes things like least privileged access, making sure that everything that should be locked down is locked down, and everything is PCI compliant, and so on and so forth. And everything is optimized for Magento 2. There are some core differences. We've got an article on the blog as well about differences between hosting Magento 1 and Magento 2. Some of it comes down to things like PHP versions. Some of it, they're pretty subtle differences. There are differences in how you update and manage a Magento 2 site, like using Composer. So there may be some intricacies there, but by and large, a lot of the principles are the same, although I'd say that Magento 2 is a little bit more robust than Magento 1, I'll be kind. So in some cases, you may want a little bit more server resource for it. If people can imagine that, as if you think about the computing power that a car needed 5 years ago or 10 years ago versus what it can do today, technology upgrades, and it requires a little bit more. So we look at that case by case. We size out folks. Our goal is not to oversell. It's also not to undersell. That we don't want to spin up an environment, architect an environment, and tailor it, and find out that it wasn't going to meet the particular needs. You'll find that a lot of web hosts will just direct you to their website to pick a hosting environment, or they'll ask you about things like your revenue, which really has no direct bearing on what your hosting needs are. We'll actually spend a little bit of time with you. We'll take a look at your analytics with you, and we will recommend an appropriate environment based on actual need, based on peak traffic and what's the volume of information that you're trying to crunch from your database, and things that we know are going to have an impact on the overall performance of the site.
Okay. So you have new servers environment, say for that Magento 2 that's more optimized for Magento 2, and I've seen that in collaborating with you. And I totally agree with you also, like the front end and back end, pretty much all the code goes to the trash, and we just imported data, which is a benefit. It could be ported also to any other platform, but there's a benefit to porting over to the same platform because it's readily
it's much closer to a one-to-one migration versus
much easier.
Like if you were to go, some of the SaaS solutions don't really handle product attributes in nearly the same way, that it's just random meta information tied down. In some cases, it can be much more challenging depending on where you're going, to not only to get the data over, but to be able to utilize it in the same way.
Exactly.
I will say that in some cases, I've seen merchants try to use the same extensions from the same developers, just for the new version. So they had a certain reward point or a gift card extension for Magento 1. They'll try to get the same extension for Magento 2 to try to help make moving that data over all the existing gift cards, all the existing reward points over to the new site. So there are benefits like that sometimes you can make your life a little bit easier with.
For reward points, that could be certainly a good approach, but on a general way, you would still want to review every single extension if they're still relevant. Like lots of people were using, for example, the product import extension MagMe in Magento 1.
Oh, no.
Pretty much, you don't need MagMe in Magento 2. The native import can do all that stuff. There are other.
And MagMe, I can't think of a year where it didn't make security headlines because it was being terribly abused by hackers. So that's one of those cases where I can't stand seeing that still installed anywhere. I appreciate the value proposition of it, but I don't think it's been a good solution for the user base in general. But I'm with you that I think that most of the time, if you were to go through just like software in a computer or apps on a phone or tablet, people have hoarded these over time, that it's taken years of downloading, installing, et cetera. These different software add-ons, these modules or extensions, plugins, however you want to label them, Magento vernacular, of course, extensions. But how many are really bringing value today? How many are worth buying again, installing, maintaining, as they need to be patched on occasion? Any technical debt that they add in terms of, more code that could potentially be compromised or slow down your site or cause other issues. If the average site has 20 or 30 extensions, I would guess that maybe a third to half of them are really, really necessary. And a lot of the rest, they're just relics. They're sitting around. They were an interesting idea. They may have had more popularity at another time, but they're not really going to use, or due to some of these improvements in Magento 2 that we were talking about, things that relate to, you name it, to site search, to checkout, whatever it may be, that maybe you don't need anymore. Maybe you don't want anymore. Or maybe they were just integrations for things that aren't really in use anymore, that people don't use or don't care about. Payment systems change, shipping systems change, integrations with other systems. Maybe there was a day where you were connecting with more, coupon websites, in an affiliate way, and you're not anymore. Really depends. You go and you sit down, and I think it's really a great opportunity to start fresh. And that's another area where I think a lot of people have been misquoted over time on the process of moving from M1 to M2, because they basically said, here's everything that I've got, how much to move. And they didn't really sit down, and they don't remember what half those extensions are. They don't even know if they're really using them or not. They didn't actually identify what their real scope was. There were too many assumptions on the table.
Yeah, for sure. You need the discovery and planning, and it's perfect time to reinvent the user's experience and do even better. Like now you have more experience. Maybe it was your first site, maybe it was your second or third or fourth site, whatever. Now you're going to go again with another site. It's the perfect timing to reinvent all that.
And even if you were going to go to another platform and not go to Magento 2, that planning is still just as valuable. And I think that dealing with Magento experts through that planning is extremely helpful, because they know what those extensions were. They were around, they installed them for people.
That's right. And it's not everybody who will move from Magento 1 to Magento 2. Some will go to other platform, and it will be the right choice. Magento 2 is even more targeted toward the mid-market, mid-size enterprise. It can, of course, serve a small mom and pop shop, but it's not the targeted, clientele for it. So they're really going after mid-size all the way to enterprise. So that, but of course, small business as well. But it's more like businesses like a million and up of offline revenue that they're after.
I'd say that from our vantage point at JetRails, that's pretty accurate. That 10 years ago, when a lot of folks were jumping on Magento 1 in the first place, other solutions weren't really readily available. And there are solutions now, if they're doing straight retail, basic products, small catalog, that they probably don't need Magento, to do
the
$10,000 or $50,000 or $100,000 in revenue a year. There's better solutions for that. If you're trying to treat e-commerce as the primary source of business, as a primary channel within your organization, as an important channel within your organization that you really want to be on the cutting edge of, that you really want a lot of flexibility. If you really care about your data, and you want to stay open source because you don't want that data being in the hands of a lot of other parties, there are different reasons that you're going to choose Magento 2. I guess I've written more articles than I realized, but I'd written for one of our industry partners, N Channel, a few months back, an article about why our users had been choosing, by and large, to go from Magento 1 to Magento 2 and not to other options, because there are other options, and there's no question. And I think that in a lot of cases it did have to do with security and compliance and data. When you go, some of it had to do with pricing and just manifest destiny. When you go to, for instance, a SaaS platform, you don't really own the site in the same way. You don't control which apps are available. You can't edit those apps in the same way. They're not extensions. They're hosted somewhere. You can't really, have the same impact on what those apps are going to cost you long term. You're paying somebody for those. They're hosted elsewhere. Their ongoing fees. It's not like an extension that's purchased and installed. There's a lot of unknowns. You can't control so much of the experience. And like I say, that there are users where that more locked down, more limited experience is going to be perfectly fine, and in some cases better, more beneficial, better, simpler experience for a company. But if you got value out of that Magento 1 instance, chances there's a reason. And so I think that's, there's a lot of moving parts when it comes to the difference between Magento and other systems. But JetRails, we provide single tenant web hosting, dedicated environments. So we typically deal with folks that are going to have at least a dedicated server or their own account with AWS or DigitalOcean, in the cloud. And, so we don't have the small shared hosting in the tens of dollars a month kind of an offering. We don't find that Magento is really as performant and what have you there. Yeah. And so there are different hosts out there. That's part of what allows us to provide the really high touch, white glove, mission critical support that we do, because that's what we're focused on. And we've chosen that knowingly. But because we mainly work with businesses that are a little bit more established, I think that that's part of the interesting line that we saw, that there are a lot of users that have gone SaaS, but they're not really the target audience that we have, nor do we believe that they're the target audience that Magento has laid out for Magento 2, which
no, it's a personalized
I think you got it right. $1 million and up in annual online revenue or thereabouts, depending on their use case.
Yeah, for sure. The Magento is about personalized experience, because often with a SaaS platform, you have very limited control on what you can change. Sure, you can change the layout, the colors, but you're still going to have pretty much the same experience as the competitor. So with Magento, you have a more unique approach. You can do whatever you want there. So you'll be able to stand out more and be different. So that's the first thing. The second thing is Magento has a real strength on business process automation. So a lot of stuff that you would do manually, you can automate, reduce human errors. You can, let's say, print your shipping labels automatically that you can stick on boxes, create packaging, how many products fit in a box and stuff like that. You can automate and streamline the fulfillment and operation aspect. So it's more than just a website. It goes all the way to, business process automation. That makes a huge difference.
The SaaS market. So if we were to look at a platform like Shopify, there were integrations like MailChimp that came and went. And if you were tied to MailChimp and now there was no integration anymore, you were high and dry. You were forced to choose another marketing platform rather than, something like Magento, where you retain choice. The same with things like payments, where if you want to use a different payment processor with Shopify, you're going to pay a penalty. It's not your website. The same way that they have something to say about perhaps what products you're selling or certain other facets of the site. I'm not against apps in general. I think that there are lots of cases for integration and using something that's more than a one-off extension. But apps typically get access to a range of data, and that includes customer data and other things that are really sensitive. Shopify recently had a security incident where some of their employees were caught basically stealing data from their merchants. and selling it. Now that's something that they dealt with pretty effectively with the authorities. They didn't, sweep it under the rug. So I'm not suggesting that that Shopify, is okay with that, or that there can't be. I don't know how I want to say this. Let's put on my comic book hat and say evildoers out there that are going to make bad choices and do things like that. But at the same time, if every app that you're using is opening up your data to yet another company, and you need a lot of apps in order to hit the baseline functionality that you need in the long run, that's something I think that as an industry that we're still coping with. The same way that we're coping with all those app providers. Is there, I work at a web host, right? Is their hosting secure? What standards are they meeting? Is it scalable? Will they have a problem on Black Friday? Is that app going to slow down my website? Do I have any control over it? With an open source extension, you might be able to gut things out or do certain things, to adjust, or, if you're really limited to available apps, you're really limited. And basically, if you don't like available apps, you have to go and write your own and host it and manage it, at which point you may as well have started with open source and stuck with it.
Right. And it can slow down the user's experience. If you have a lot of apps calling external services, they need an answer and so on. If you just have one or two, okay, but if you have a lot, it can stack up. And the other point is about regulation and compliance. Like some industry will have limitation, like the data cannot cross the border, stuff like that. And then you'll look more at self-hosted solution rather than SaaS, for sure. So
absolutely, and in some of these cases, there's API throttling and other limitations that you can't always do what you want to do with that data anyway. So you really have to think about, again, talking about these folks that are doing some volume, that are more established. That I think that you really have to sit down and look at the pros and cons, because what I've seen happen in recent years are merchants that talk to someone that's really trying to sell them something. And, and that's okay. But in that case, you have to talk to someone that's trying to sell you the other thing too.
Right.
Because the grass is always going to be greener on the other side. If you only look at the pros of something and not the cons, I think that's a tough way to make a good decision.
And let's say, if we want to wrap up, is there any specific topic that we forgot or anything else that we should cover to talk about that migration of Magento 1 to Magento 2?
I think we've covered a lot of the major bases. I think that the biggest question that came up maybe a few months ago was, do I go to Magento 2.3 or 2.4? 2.4.0 had just come out, and so was a little fresh itself. October 15th, they released version 2.4.1, right. And it's a lot more stable. And as time goes, more of the extensions in the Magento marketplace are being made compatible with the 2.4 family, with the 2.4 track there. So I think that that's perhaps an important question. Whether you go with a more traditional front end or a PWA front end, I think is a question we've tackled. But
that's a
it's
bigger
something
question, that PWA or not, because it's one or the other, and there's no easy switch. It's a makeover after. But at the version, you're gonna have development time anyway. So most projects will be like 3 to 6 months anyway. So they're going to iron out the bugs in 2.4.1 and release the next version. So I think the version is not too much of a problem right now. But for sure, PWA is a big decision.
Yeah, and I think that Magento open source versus Magento commerce is another big question that we've just scratched at. I do have an article on that one too, on some of the decision process, some of the questions that merchants will typically ask when trying to figure that out. To me, it really comes down to a cost-benefit analysis. So Magento Commerce, Magento Enterprise as it used to be known, or EE, Enterprise Edition, it includes a large assortment of different additional features. And so that includes things like Page Builder, which is a great way from the admin side to be able to lay out different landing pages and things with more of a drag and drop style editor. More like you might be familiar with if you've ever used an email marketing platform in recent years, things like that. Some great stuff. For B2B organizations, Magento Commerce has some really strong B2B features. But the way that I look at it, you have to be able to use a certain number of these to get value out of it. And it's not a cheap long-term investment when you think about it over the course of 10 years. And any increases and things that come with it. And so you want to make sure that you're not putting budget somewhere that's going to take away from your marketing and growth, that's going to stifle you, that you choose wisely. That I see a lot of, a lot of that question come up from our users. From a performance standpoint, we have a really great time scaling both. So we don't really run into too many issues there. And then from the hosting standpoint, I think that there have been changes in the landscape. So there are hosts that used to be more prevalent in the Magento world that aren't anymore. At JetRails, our company's around for over 20 years. And there's a lot of institutional knowledge and really a deep relationship with the Magento community. And what we've looked at, there are these shared multi-tenant hosts. We've really found what was best performing and what led to the best results for customers long run. I usually advise people don't focus holistically and only on the monthly cost. Think about the difference that the loading speed optimization will make in your site if you've got a team working with you on that. Think about the security layers that you need and what your host is including and what they're actually monitoring and managing for you. Think about the load testing and scalability if you're going to know if your site is ready for whether it's Black Friday or a major marketing campaign. Doesn't mean that JetRails is going to be the right solve for everyone. Think about the support expectations that you have. Do you expect your host to pick up the phone? How quickly do you expect them to respond to a ticket? How many people do you expect to need to go through until you get to resolution on that ticket or call? That all these things, time is money in e-commerce. And I think that we've all learned through the years that best effort, as they say in the telecoms, is not really what anyone's looking for. It's mission critical. So figuring out exactly what your needs and expectations are and what your flexibility needs are, that we found that there are a lot of web hosts that will spin up a Magento environment, but it's inflexible, and a lot of Magento extensions won't work there. A lot of other customizations aren't compatible. So, from the host's vantage point, it's really about figuring out what your needs are and what's going to work best for you in the long run. What's going to service you best if you're paying by the hour for support from your developers. What's going to be effective there versus having them chase for days and weeks after a host for an issue. And so we look at those sorts of things. And I think the same when it comes to developers. It's the same thing that you want to be thinking about. You want a team that knows the platform, that is going to spend time in understanding and discovering your needs and putting together the right project plan. As soon as you commoditize these things, I think that's where these projects usually start on the decline.
You need an expert with you. You cannot just shop yourself. You need a CPA, you need a lawyer, you need a web developer, and so on. So yeah, for sure, there are lots of additions. Magento open source, Magento Commerce, and then Commerce either on-premise or Commerce Cloud. All the different choices that you have there. And on-premise would be, let's say, hosted with you guys. And for many industries, that's actually required. You have all those weed CBD industries, or you have other regulations online contests. You have all kind of industry that
sure, all kinds of compliances and
compliance
things
stuff
sure.
From different states and so on, that you will have to have your own on-premise environment.
Sure. And the same with some of those larger users when it comes to scalability. We truly auto scale. We're elastic. We scale horizontally and vertically in the cloud, where some of the prefab environments have a harder time being able to handle the loads that we can handle much more elegantly. So it really comes down to use case and what someone's individual needs are.
For sure. Okay, so that kind of covers it. So let's say bottom line to wrap this up, you can put Magento 1 on live support to sort of extend this, but you should have a game plan to transition to Magento 2, because any money you reinvest in your Magento 1 is, well, eventually a loss for sure. It's old architecture. It's like your VHS, as I was saying. Nobody reinvest in that. We're at DVD and streaming and HD TV and so on. It's a new set of technology. And it can be an exciting project. That's another thing to remember. Like say, hey, I can work on my business. I can improve my customer's experience. I can improve this whole thing. It doesn't have to feel like I'm being forced to getting my arm twist to upgrade to Magento 2 or change to another platform. It's a good.
That's right. It all starts with knowing your options, and so having that conversation with some great agencies and understanding what the real costs are going to look like. Understanding proper hosting environment and costs and long-term expenditure. I think it's all important to the overall process. Understanding Magento open source versus Magento commerce. That process of knowing what your choices are is empowering, because then it's a question of when, not a question of if, because it's understandable that people aren't going to be on Magento 1 in 10 years. So this is a question of figuring out a roadmap for your organization on an individual basis. And while yes, this very much is about money. That's the reason that most people haven't upgraded that are on Magento 1. It's because of cost in both physical dollars and in their own internal resources that have to spearhead from their side the project, and the things that they're responsible for. I would just say, overall, think about all of it as a long-term investment. Think about, okay, I've gotten a lot out of this car. It's still running. It's still getting me to work, but is this my future, or, am I waiting for it to completely break down, or what am I doing with it? What would my experience be with an upgrade? What would the benefits be? The same way when you're trying to choose your agency, the same way when you're trying to choose your web host. It's not about the very cheapest thing for your business. If every decision that you made was about the very, very, very cheapest solution that you could come up with, you wouldn't be in business for all that long. That there's just so long that business is going to operate effectively and see growth when you don't invest into your future. So, at all points in this decision process, I always, try to make sure that people think about it, not just from the short-term cost, but look at it as the long game. What's my ROI going to be from this? And what's my satisfaction going to be? How am I going to be happier here? Is this going to be a good move for me? What's safer? What's healthier? Just like everything else in life, I could change my own oil for, whatever, these days, $20, but I'd much rather drop off the car and have someone else do it. My time's worth more than that. So, figuring out in life what's important, and in business, I think equally so. Our time is our most valuable commodity. Do you want to keep scratching at this, or do you want to move forward with it? You've got to put yourself in control.
Yeah, cost benefit analysis, where you're at now, where you want to go with e-commerce growth,
and risk analysis, which I think not enough people do in the industry. But really, risk of staying on M1 versus risk of going to M2. Risk of going with this host versus that host. I actually like, and I think more people would sleep better at night if they did a risk analysis on some of these things.
All right. Okay, cool. Well, thank you for being here, Robert. Thank you for your expertise.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Ecommerce Wizards Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes. And contact us at MageMontreal.com.